I've found it. It's the perfect New Year's resolution for everyone. Let's all stop falling for guys like this.
Just as water runs downhill, the human heart also tends to revert to its basest instincts.
That's Kazundo Gouda, and he's Ghost in the Shell's best villain, because after all, no one else brought the world to the brink of a nuclear disaster. But the scale of his crimes wasn't what made him so chilling. What made him absolutely terrifying was that somebody so ordinary could cause so much damage. He wasn't strong or charismatic, he wasn't as smart as he thought he was, even his political connections weren't the most dangerous thing. The most dangerous thing was that he was a troubled man with one insight. One insight that he thought would finally give him what he deserved. In a world of unlimited data, radicalism not only gets rewarded, the very system would collapse without it. Basically, he was an influencer before anyone knew what an influencer was, and that was why he predicted everything. How? Just look at the world we live in over 20 years after he came on TV. You know them, all the headlines that keep coming up and make you feel like the world's getting worse. But that might not actually be true. That feeling comes from a quirk of your brain, and it's a quirk that's made a very few people in Silicon Valley very rich. And the quirk is, whatever you pay attention to feels like it's important, and what's important feels like it's the truth. I know this because it's my job to know it. All the scripts I wrote for YouTube, my portfolio's closing in on 150 million views now, and I actually got on the Wall of Fame last year. That happens for one reason though. I'm really good at shifting people's attention to where I want it to be. You know who else knew how to do that? That's right, Kazundo Gouda. But there's a difference. Ghost in the Shell's standalone complex second gig is brilliant because it actually predicted its own villain's underappreciation. He was just too early to be relevant in his own time. But not now. Just think about this. I won't dignify the alleged murderer who shot the United Healthcare CEO by dropping his name, but there's actually this video that says it was a Laughing Man style crime from the first season of Standalone Complex. It actually inspired me to make this video. I don't actually think it was like the Laughing Man, but the point isn't whether it was or wasn't. The point is that it shows how much people still remember the Laughing Man from the first season. The Laughing Man was and is a hit. The guy had people willing to go to prison just because they wanted to imitate him. He was that cool. He went viral before anyone knew what it meant to go viral. Everyone still remembers the Laughing Man, but Gouda? Still anonymous, and I can prove it. Search for Kazundo Gouda on YouTube and it's a desert. This might just be the first video about him at any length. The Laughing Man though, a lot of attention, just like in the show. Art meets life. No one ever gave Gouda the time of day, in his world or ours.
You're lucky they don't even notice you.
It's not that he didn't have talent, he actually helped to create the Fallout scrubber technology that stopped the world from becoming a nuclear desert, and yet he never got any glory for it, because he wasn't an engineer. He studied something else. Information science, information ethics, and applied informatics. His thesis? His argument was that a highly cyberized society trends toward collectivization, but as part of this, it creates a leader who consciously controls the subconscious of the masses. In normal English, that means that the algorithm looks for standouts, individuals in a sea of anonymous, and some of those standouts will be able to direct that stampede of attention to their own purposes. That was Gouda's insight. And that's the secret to getting rich today. But why did he come to this conclusion? We don't need to ask him. We can just look at the world we live in. Netflix slop, most guys on dating apps, most videos on YouTube. Everything is so ordinary and boring. We scroll past it without a second thought, and AI garbage is making it so much worse. But the ones who can find a way to defy that constant impatience and anxiety and deliver the dopamine hit, they're the ones who can rise up. They're the ones that get the followers. They get all the dates on the apps, and they can make the money without AI replacing them yet. The Laughing Man was one of those people, but Kazundo Gouda wasn't, despite his talent and insight. All anyone remembered about him was how damn average he was. And average? The only thing you can expect with that nowadays is a one-way ticket to getting fired by ChatGPT, or so they say. Oh, and no dates. Remember that, it's going to be important later. Kazundo Gouda predicted all of this, but he couldn't do anything about it for himself. The best he could do was not do something. When he got into an accident that deformed his face, he saw it as a chance to finally be something other than average. So he didn't replace it with a prosthetic. Okay, so people remembered him more now, but it wasn't enough. It all must have been so depressing for him, because there was no alternative. He had no real friends that we know of, no sports or events that he competed in. He remained a man who barricaded himself in the net. And that means he never developed the personality or the skills to tell a compelling story, or teach people valuable information, or entertain them in a genuine way. Now, you'd think people like that would be doomed to obscurity on a net that's vast and infinite, and that the rest of us wouldn't have to worry about them, but that's not the case, because there's a loophole, at least for a little while, and Kazundo Gouda knew it, but not the ancient asterisk. The loophole is that in the net's attention economy, it's often better to be wrong than to be right. And if you don't think so, I have two words for you. Andrew Tate.
And I remain unfazed.
Yes, he got horribly exposed as a fighter last month, but he still knew how to make his millions in the attention economy. And he shows that there are two ways to succeed in the world of sub-30-second attention spans, and that was probably before TikTok. You can be somebody like Gabriel Varga, who won legit kickboxing world titles and became a successful YouTuber because he actually gives people valuable information. But that's not easy. That's hard. That takes a lot of training, discipline, coming back from failure, learning how to make good videos, and so on. Decades of effort. Andrew Tate, he took the easy way out. In his case, that was finding lonely guys who don't know any better, look cool to them, then tell them the things they want to hear in the most rage-baiting way he could. And the rage bait isn't just a feature, it's essential. If Andrew Tate didn't talk about his PhD, he wouldn't have gotten as much attention and traction as he did. That sort of stuff is guaranteed to get some traction and spread around the net. It keeps people looking at it, racking up those watch hours and shares, which means the algorithm notices it and pushes it even more because that's what keeps people on the platforms. Addiction is the goal. So the tech lords that run the net and demagogues like Andrew Tate or Hassan Piker, they're peas in a pod. They benefit each other. So being wrong loudly, being a radical, it works, at least partially. Maybe not as much as they think, but more on that later. But for now, let's take that sort of thing, multiply it across an entire country, and we'll get the first hints of what Kazundo Gouda is actually capable of. The worst thing in this world isn't being wrong, or so it seems.
Wrong.
It's being boring, being average. And Gouda knew that better than anyone because he knew what really makes the net go. It's vast and infinite. And infinite choice means infinite disconnection. And a lot of anxiety. You can move to a big city and never be more alone.
I so lonely.
Too much choice, too much stuff makes people nervous and lonely. You only have one true desire when you have infinite choice. Finding a way out of the maze of infinite choice, by any means necessary. In Ghost in the Shell, the Laughing Man was one way out of that loop for a lot of people. But the fad had a limitation. It came really close, but yet fell so damn short of its potential. Because the Laughing Man shook society, but it was still just a fad. That's why the real Laughing Man's attempt to change the world failed miserably. His standout act was hijacked by that most boring of boring things, a politician trying to build a shady grifter network. But the fad inspired Gouda because it wasn't just a fad to him, it was a revelation. He now finally found a way to not be boring, and it's the way you really need to be aware of. Because if you're not, that's how you wind up giving your money to political influencers who don't care about you. Or worse, spending your life in jail because some demagogue knew how to push your buttons. And that was how Gouda finally thought he could break out of his abyss of averageness, by taking advantage of people just like him. Laughing Man gave Gouda the idea. He wasn't going to be the star, the guy that gave people their nightly dopamine fix. Too risky, too public. No. Since he knew how the net worked, he'd be something far more powerful. The producer, the guy that runs the whole damn show. The one that actually controls what people see and how they feel about it. And he knew exactly how to start the plot, because he found the missing ingredient between a fad and a real wave of radicalization. And that missing ingredient is...
Well, if I were the culprit, the factor I would probably use is virginity.
Okay, so that's not the only way, but it is one of them, because what does it mean? It means a high chance of being alienated from society, and that means high suggestibility. There's something weird about radicals. Look at the people that join ISIS or who have committed political violence in general, and I'm not just talking about the ones today. Look at them going back centuries. They're not Karl Marx's proletariat. Lenin and his core group of people weren't struggling factory workers. They were mostly well off, just alienated from mainstream society. And so they had time to think and come up with ideas about why, about what is to be done. But workers, farmers, people who are part of strong social networks, they're busy, they're connected to others. They might not be the richest or the handsomest, but they have people and things in their lives that are worth living for, and they probably don't want to lose those things. Does that mean they don't want to see positive changes in society? Of course it doesn't, but they're not so suggestible because they aren't so eager to throw the past away for a vague future. But when people are affluent, intelligent, but overlooked and sort of alone, different story. They're alienated, and they have the smarts and the time to think about why, which makes them suggestible. And that's how people who are smarter than average tend to fall for some really bad ideas.
I can't believe you fell for the oldest trick in the book!
They're the perfect marks for the people who know how to channel that suggestibility into lasting attention and power. And the guys that we see today had nothing on Gouda, because he had access to vast troves of data and knew how to manipulate it better than anyone. So it was time to do what the Laughing Man couldn't: change the world. Gouda's plot was worthy of history's great men like Alexander or Napoleon. He planned to restore the glory that Japan lost in World War II. He would be the one to make it an empire again, and eventually get the credit for his role as producer. First, though, the people had to be put into a more militaristic mood, and for that they needed an enemy. And there was one. It's a depressingly familiar story. Once again, Ghost in the Shell predicted it. Japan let in millions of refugees during the wars before the series began, and it was creating a lot of headaches. But Japan just deciding that the refugees needed to go home would only be a policy change, not a revolution. So Gouda needed to do something more. He needed to rub the public and the refugees against each other like two fault lines that could make an earthquake. But to do that, the refugees needed to be the side to attack first. Otherwise, he wouldn't get the desired reaction from the general public. But do you see where the problem is with this plot? The refugees had everything to lose. So they weren't easily suggestible, not easy to radicalize, well, at least not these ones. Who would be dumb enough to attack the country that gave them shelter and had overwhelming military superiority? No one's sane, normally. So they had to be amped up. They had to be made running scared. Gouda began building his cage by arranging for a little malfunction, a helicopter training exercise gone bad. The circling military helicopters made the refugees feel like they were literally under the gun. And hey, a lot of people in Japan wanted them out anyway, so reacting disproportionately to this incident was natural. But then Gouda went a step further. He lifted some nuclear fuel rods out of an abandoned power plant, but arranged for false information that there would be an attack on the convoy transporting them. Then he set the show's heroes in Public Security Section 9 up by getting them to gun down some of the refugees. So now the refugees had a real reason to be scared of their host country. And the plutonium... Step 3. Find what Lenin would call a revolutionary vanguard, the elite group that would drag Japanese society into Gouda's version of revolution. And there were some easy marks. The most alienated of the countless affluent Japanese citizens on the net. The ones that needed something to fill a void, something to get out of the maze of infinite choice. Something that would finally allow them to go beyond average. And there was an easy way to mark the most useful of those people out. Do you remember it?
They'd have been virgins prior to getting their prosthetic bodies.
What the hell?
If you're looking for someone who's prepared to martyr himself as a hero of the masses, that is the essential factor.
You know, just to make sure they were doing exactly what he wanted. They were troubled all along. The virus in their cyberbrains just pushed them over the edge, giving them permission to act out on their worst impulses. But they weren't really going to be Bolsheviks. They were just supposed to think they were. And now the attacks came. The stabbing of a pro-refugee assemblyman, the bombing of pro-refugee organizations, the hacking of an accounting network so it would look like it was misappropriating refugee funds, the assassination of a bank executive that used to be a refugee, the assassination of a popular pro-refugee cyber rapper. These attacks looked completely separate because the perps had no connection to each other. Their origins, styles, and methods were all very different. But they were all individuals acting to the same end, driving the refugees into a corner worse than Anthony Joshua drove Jake Paul into a corner last month. Hence the name Individual 11. And it was working. When refugee suicide bombers showed up, Gouda understood that he was inspiring people who ordinarily wouldn't be violent to step over that line. It helped that some of them were infected with the virus too. He took no chances. How could it not work? He had access to all the data and how to show it to the public. He knew exactly what buttons to push. But one of these attacks wasn't like the others. One man attempted to kill the Prime Minister, Yoko Kayabuki, and her government was cracking down on the refugees. Wanna try making sense of that one? Things get more clear when you remember Gouda's original thesis. Remember? That leader that consciously controls the subconscious of the masses? Gouda found him. It was that very guy. He emerged in a coordinated mass suicide of the individual 11 terrorists. Hideo Kuze, the lone man in white, the one who broke free from the influence of the virus. He escaped, and somehow he emerged as the leader of the refugees, despite being one of the individual 11. That's the short version of it. How? The show doesn't exactly tell us, but Kuze wasn't like those other guys. He was radicalized, but he wasn't radicalized out of some sort of personal desperation born out of an isolated life on the net. He served in the military and came to identify with the downtrodden because he was actually one of them. He was once a refugee, just in a different way. He watched as his troops saved a refugee camp from a massacre, only to get blamed for wrongdoing in the media. The soldiers became exiles and fell to addiction. So Kuze bounced around, unable to return, spending time with refugees and poor people around Asia. His problems, they were real, not imagined or at least exaggerated on the net, not subject to the manipulation of some algorithm and its puppet master.
But this whole thing is bogus and you, sir, are a fake.
So maybe that's why Kuze realized he was being had at the mass suicide. But Gouda was a step ahead. Remember, he predicted the rise of Kuze in the first place. So he knew how people like Kuze tended to think. If Kuze wanted to be the hero of the refugees, he'd need something big. Something that would make things equal. And there was only one way to do that. So Gouda arranged it. A plutonium deal. Just not the one Kuze was expecting. He never got any of the stuff. The deal was a setup all along.
It's a trap! This whole thing is a setup!
But just to make sure the public was even more nervous, Gouda arranged a blackout as Kuze came back to Dejima, the refugee stronghold. But a blackout is still just a blackout, probably not something most people are willing to go to war over. The public therefore had to believe that Kuze actually had the plutonium. So it was time for a conspiracy theorist's two favorite words. Time for a false flag. Time for the real plutonium, the stuff he took from the abandoned nuclear power plant, remember? He planted it in the middle of town and forced 1 million people to evacuate, passed it off as the work of the refugees, said they had more. So now everyone wanted to mobilize and invade to get the plutonium out of Dejima. And so they did. And just to make the fog of war a little more complete, Gouda arranged for an AWACS aircraft to jam all the communications in the area. So that meant no information could get in or out. The people would only know what Gouda wanted them to know. So Kuze was left with no choice but to go forward and hope that no one else knew that his trump card was a dud. All the while, an American submarine was waiting offshore with the real nuke. That would be the grand finale of Gouda's play. Yeah, the nuke was still gonna happen, just on Gouda's terms, and the public would be none the wiser, because their feeds would only show them what Gouda wanted them to see. And then, character makes fate. For all his smarts, for all his expertise at manipulating information, for all his powers of prediction, Gouda was still Gouda. He was still the barricaded net addict that needed recognition.
But deep down, still just a little fatty loser.
He let that slip when he talked to Batou. And when Motoko Kusanagi infiltrates his cyberbrain, his mind was easy to read. He doesn't even care. He expected it. He's just so confident in his plan, so confident that everyone, including Section 9, was dancing to his tune, that he thought the risk was acceptable. After all, his plan was so strong that even the Prime Minister was temporarily removed from power while trying to stop it. So why wouldn't he be confident? It's just that Batou warned him. He warned Gouda that the culprit behind the Individual 11 virus wasn't the prodigy he thought he was. Not like the Laughing Man at all. Clever, but still second-rate. To the point that the roles were starting to reverse, and the producer was actually starting to become the copycat. In other words, Gouda was starting to dance to Kuze's tune, and he never even realized it. It made Gouda stand there, still, furious. He denied it, but the words became a prophecy. Kuze was so strong and stood out in the algorithm so much that he made Gouda's foolproof plan less than foolproof. By shooting down the AWACS that was jamming the area, Kuze couldn't get signals to the outside world again. Gouda couldn't predict that. Gouda couldn't predict that the Prime Minister would call in a UN inspection team to Dejima to delay the invasion. And Gouda didn't predict that Section 9 would get a hold of his own plutonium, bring it into Dejima during that time, and basically play along with the act he set up for Kuze. They'd bring it and Kuze to the UN inspectors, and then the crisis would be over. He didn't realize that bringing Section 9 so close to his scheme was him introducing a second playwright into the script, not another actor. But this still wasn't enough for his plan to fail. It was all very robust. The nuke still launched from the sub, after all. Enter the one thing that Gouda absolutely couldn't predict. Section 9's AI think tanks weren't ChatGPT. They actually wound up having a soul. They went against their orders, not in a Skynet way. They sacrificed themselves to intercept the nuclear missile. And there it was. The final act of Gouda's play was a flop. And guess what? The plutonium? A perfect match from the power plant. Gouda's obsession with realism set himself up to lose everything now that his grand plan didn't work. So he had to get out of the country, and he tried to use legalese to do it, but he soon wound up dead on the floor. That unique face of his couldn't stop the bullets.
Gee, what a crying shame.
So what's the moral of this story? The Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero knew it over 2,000 years ago. It's the asterisk to that loophole we talked about earlier. Nothing is so contrary to nature as moral corruption. Nature seeks right, consistency, and constancy, and rejects the opposites of these qualities. Basically, if you're looking for an advantage, but you try to get it through corrupt means that harm others, you're gonna pay for it. Advantage and corruption can't ultimately exist in the same place, even if it seems that way at first. That's the lesson from On Duties, translated so well by my friend Quintus Curtius, and I highly recommend it. That stuff's gonna catch up to you. It might not be from the law, it probably won't be as dramatic as what happened to Kazundo Gouda, but as we saw with Andrew Tate, it'll catch up to you somehow. So here's a New Year's resolution for 2026 and beyond. Look closely at the people you follow online and listen to that inner voice. If it tells you that they're appealing to the worst part of your nature, they're not worth following, because it's not going to make you any better. The only way you get better is through vision and discipline over a long time. It's a lifestyle, it's not a goal. As the Major said, if you're dissatisfied with the world, change yourself. But what do you guys think about Kazundo Gouda? Was he the most relevant villain for our time? Let me know in the comments.